But basically what we're doing with trimming is we are subtracting clay off of our thrown piece and putting the foot on it. What's really beautiful, I think, about having a foot is it's kind of, if this was a sentence, this is the beginning of the sentence and the end. So if you can think of this profile as like, I don't know, a story or something, having a beginning and an end, there's some sort of grace to it, I think. So your foot is important too. This is where your signature goes. This is where someone, me, I pick up every plate and I turn it upside down to look at the foot. And I think personally, I don't know if it's poetic or not, but it's like, if someone doesn't pay attention to the foot and like how they finish it, I'm just like, I don't need, I don't pay attention to you. And this is my opinion, right? It doesn't matter. Like, actually half the time I don't put feet on my pieces when I'm like in production mode because this is time consuming. But if I really am thinking about form and artistry, I like to put a nice foot on it. It's also, we're removing clay to help the weight of it. Here is this is a plate. This is a plate untrimmed, right? So I did mention when we were talking about bowls, having extra clay to support any of the horizontal movement. A plate is the most horizontal thing that you can make. So there's a lot of extra clay here. So I'm gonna just pass that around. You can feel how heavy that is versus a trimmed plate. And you can see how much extra clay goes into or how much we have to remove. And just feel the difference between what feels comfortable and what feels right, So picking up a pot that feels how it should is a really nice feeling, and even some people like when you pick it up and you're surprised by how light it is. That's a fun feeling too. Those pots though tend to be super fragile. So if you are planning on using it like every day as like your plate that you eat off of, maybe the thinnest pot isn't the best pot. So I do have, and these will always be on my cart, just kind of the steps for how I trim. And there's some there if anyone wants to follow along. You're more than welcome to take a copy too, or take a picture of it. But what we're doing, or what you have, is we've thrown bowls. I think bowls are the easiest to start with trimming because you have this wider base down here, so things don't topple over as easily, versus a cylinder, it's kind of like a Jeep, it's top heavy, and it's easy to knock it over. So starting with a bowl is really nice, and you have to envision at this point what your foot is going to look like. So we have all this extra clay, and I'm just like thinking about where that extra clay is and where I can see my foot living on this bowl. So on these sheets I say, number one, I want you to inspect the inside of your pot, meaning this shape here, because once we turn it upside down and attach it to the wheel, it's really best to not have to like pick it up and check and put it back. Once it's there, try and trim it all in one go. It'll make your life easier. Of course you can put it back on and trim again, but it just makes your life easier if you can memorize this shape. So there's three things I like to do when I am inspecting the inside of my shape. One, I run my fingers down the side of the piece and I start to feel where the clay, where there's extra clay. So it's like right about here for me, I put a little mark. Generally the inside, and I mentioned this last time, we want to throw the inside of our pots when we're throwing, and I don't trim anything out of the inside once it's done. Trimming leaves marks, so you can't really get this smooth surface back, especially if your clay has grog in it, and you'll see that later. But so I ran my fingers down the side. I'm like, oh, right about there, I have extra clay. I just put a little mark. And then I'm also just kind of inspecting the slope. Is it like steep? Is it shallow? Is there a quick change in direction? Little things like that. And I'm just trying to create a mental image. And then the last thing I do is I feel the very lowest point, and I try and just understand how much clay is actually there. I mentioned we want about 1/4 inch, but you might have more and you might have less. So once you get a good idea of what the inside of the pot looks like, I put it upside down on the wheel. You gotta get yourself some clay that's on the stiffer side for wads. So you can use, I actually grabbed clay just out of the buckets over there. You're more than welcome to do that. Using a clay that's a different clay body might leave that clay on your pot, it's fine, but like if you're using porcelain, you're paying the extra money for that really white clay. You might not want to use red clay as a quad. So anyway, getting some clay, and you can just work like the clay out of your bag in your hands to a stiffness that's good. But you don't want to use fresh clay. It's not stiff enough. So, but first, before we even start trimming, we need to center this pot on our wheel. If we threw it centered, you should be able to like match your lip to the rings on the wheel. Most likely, even me, my pots are never that centered. They're close, but I never like rely on the rings of the wheel. So we do need to center it. There's a couple ways to center your pot. This is number 2, upside down on the wheel. One is called tap centering, and it's fun to try. But what you're doing is I'm holding one hand, and this hand's just like feeling for when it's touching it. I'm holding this hand nice and still, and then I'm gonna tap with this hand until it's close. And so another thing to think about too is often this is like, there's a little bit of wobble in it because it's like my finger marks and you're all touching it. So I'm just taking the average of this and trying to get it as close to center as possible. You could spend forever like really trying to get it close to center or perfectly centered, but get as close as you can. The other suggestion I have is using your needle tool or like a fingernail or even a pencil. And this, in the beginning, this is how I learned and it made sense to me. So if your pot was off center, if I held my hand still, my finger's not moving, it's gonna touch in that one spot where the pot is farthest out. Now if I could just mark the pot where it's farthest out, my nails are too short, just using the sharpness of this pencil, I'm holding the pencil still, right? And it's just marking that one spot. That tells me where it's farthest off center. So if I can find the beginning and the end of that line, finding the center point and pushing directly towards the center, and then coming back, this line should have gotten bigger. It should be closer to center. Notice I'm not like quickly going in because you'll just gouge your pot. So slowly kind of approach it until you start to touch it. So that line got longer. Again, I do the same process. I find the center of that line and I push it forward. The shorter your line is, usually, generally, the more you push. The longer the line is, that means it's closer to being centered. Does that make sense? Holding your hand still is important. Not drinking too much coffee is important. So I'm shaky. So that's pretty much, it went all the way around. It's really close. If I just touch this here, I feel like my finger's touching it evenly. Notice I'm working on the top part of my pot, or I guess this is the bottom, but right now it's the top. I want to center the foot. Most likely when we're just learning to throw, what we're throwing is going to maybe be off to one side. We want to think about just the center part. So if you're paying attention to this is your lip, it might confuse you. So you're just looking up here and you're touching this spot here. There's a little hint here. It says, let the pot come meet your tool. And that's what I meant by holding your tool still, letting the clay come touch your tool. And that's a good thing to just remember during this whole process. And even when you're centering the clay, when it's wet. Now we need to anchor this pot down. These anchors, you want it stiff, like I said. Now make sure you're holding your pot down or on the other side when you go to anchor it, because that little push of the clay in might knock the pot off center that you just spent time getting centered. So 3 anchors is enough. The higher your pot is, if it was like a cylinder, I would use like anchors that are higher up. But this is nice and stable. There's a low profile on the bottom. So three anchors at least. Hold the pot down so it doesn't shift when you anchor. And then I'm always like making sure things are stuck. If this clay dries out, these anchors dries out, they'll pop off. So just paying attention to that too. Maybe even just add some water. So then Now we need to start imagining the shape of the foot and where we want it to be. And so I'm thinking about how much clay am I removing from the inside of my foot, or the outside of my foot and the inside of my foot. Most likely, I remember when I was trimming this, I had about that much clay. So you can imagine this foot, there was a lot more clay, and I imagined where I wanted it to be on this pad of clay. Does that make sense? So, we have to remove clay on the outside of the foot and the inside of the foot. Generally, you always, and this is a good rule of thumb, is you want to have a foot or removing clay at least on the inside of the foot, so that when you put it on a surface, it doesn't wobble. If you don't remove the clay on the inside of the foot, it's just a pad of clay that when you cut it off the wheel, most likely after you fire it, there's gonna be a little bit of a wobble. So if you look at any design, there's always a foot. Any cup, a Nalgene even has just a little dimple on the inside. So yeah, so it needs that little dimple. So sometimes if I'm making things that I don't want to trim, I even just heel in the center of the pot so it's sitting on the rim or the foot. Okay. Now I like to say remove the clay from the outside of your pot first. When we're removing clay, we're using these trimming tools. This is most likely what you got in your beginner pottery toolkit. You can find these at the Sculpey aisle in Michael's. They're for Sgraffito. You can get fancy and buy more expensive ones. These are by Diamond Core, and they stay sharp a really long time. My favorite tool is an $11, it's not this one, but it's an $11 Kemper trimming tool because it's not stainless steel, it's just steel, and you can resharpen it. These you cannot resharpen, so once they're dull, they're dull. But they work fine, you just got them, so they're nice and sharp. So you're gonna be using your trimming tool to remove clay, and you're holding it, if I'm right-handed, again, I'm over here at between 3 and 6, and left-handed, you're over here between 6 and 9. But you need some downward pressure on your pot so that this sideways pressure doesn't knock it off. So I like to personally put a little kind of dot right in the center, and that's a spot for my middle finger to rest. And then this is also a place for you to connect your hands here. My elbow's planted, and I'm just gonna, and I'm even holding this trimming tool with my thumb here. I'm just gonna start removing the clay from the outside. If this was off and wobbly, holding this tool still and just removing the high points first is what you want to do until you're removing clay equally all the way around. This clay is perfect. See how it's coming off in ribbons? That's how you know it's that Instagram satisfy me stuff, right? Just watch it. If it's a little too wet and these are sticking to your pot, then that's too wet. I would stop and let it dry. You can trim pretty dry, it just becomes flaky, and if you're creating dust, I would wear a mask. So I'm putting pressure down, and I'm just gonna, in my line right here, I put that line with my thumbnail. I know I'm gonna trim down to here, because I want to try and create even walls. I want the walls to be even so that when I pick it up, it feels balanced. So notice I'm holding this tool in a lot of different ways. I'm using all of these edges in whatever way. It's not a 40 or 90 degree angle. It's a nice 45-degree angle to remove the clay. You can rock the tool like this. You can use just a part of it and run it up the side. Yeah, you probably can't see over there.
Have you ever punched through it?
Yes, so when we're first learning to make pots, or learning the potter's wheel, there's 3 objects you always will make in your first go around. You'll make an ashtray, you'll make a shot glass, and you'll make a planter. So that's what did you ask that, one of you guys? Yeah, so punching through, often in the beginning we punch right through, and if you make a little hole there, you made yourself a planter. Or a berry bowl, right? So put a bunch of holes, you got a strainer. So But notice, see how my trimming lines are different from my thrown lines? So that's why ideally it's like, if you like the thrown lines and you want to keep them, you want to trim as little as possible. It's very hard to get those back. Now, I'm trying to think of that shape on the inside, that slope, and what that looks like. I'm gonna start tapping it. It sounds almost like the same octave across this whole profile. So that might mean it's even. Up here, hear the difference? It's definitely thicker. I haven't even started trimming it. So you'll notice I tap it as I go. The lower the octave, the thinner it is. Until it almost sounds like a drum, like a leather drum that's pulled real tight. So once you remove most of the clay on the outside, feel confident that it's closer to where you want it. It's not done. Then you want to start removing the inside clay. The reasoning I say remove the outside first instead of the inside is this downward pressure. If I removed my inside clay first, I could, with my hand even, just punch straight through. So that's why I think at least taking the majority of it off of the outside first is nice. Now, I can use this as like the outside of my foot if I want, or I could even like come in and be like, oh no, I actually want my foot like here or something. But, oh, I forgot to mention too, often in the beginning our lips were not even when we were throwing it. So when you put this upside down, your foot, or where you cut it off of the wheel, this might like be sloped in one direction or the other. So you do want to level it out, maybe even doing that first before you start everything. Leveling it out, again, is just like removing just the high points. I like to pick like a small point in the leveling, and I just slowly go in, just removing the high points, creating these valleys and ridges. It's a lot easier to control like a smaller point of contact than a bigger contact. So, and then you can just remove the ridges. Now it's nice and level. So now, when I go to put my foot in here, it's level. So, I think I like the width of this foot, so I'm gonna leave that on the outside, and I'll just remove some of the clay on the inside. I like to draw a line going down, and now I know I want to remove everything inside of this. Following, I'm trying to keep pressure when I can, downward. It's just awkward.
So you don't go all the way down like depth-wise first?
No, yeah, not right away, because once you do that, it becomes pretty weak. So you're still putting force on this. So notice I'm going like back and forth between, this is just what I do. Using a smaller point of contact, following that stylus, if this is a record player, all the way in. And you can even go back out too. You don't have to just go in. Now in my mind, I know how much clay I had at this base. So I know pretty much right here, if I'm gonna break through, it's gonna be in that point. So trying to keep the, thinking of this and how much like has been removed from that height. Some people throw to trim because they just love it so much. It's really relaxing. And you will, I still trim through pots. It's fine. If I'm ever making, if someone's like ordering a set of plates, I always use plates as an example. I'm gonna make, if they want 10 plates, I'm gonna make 12, or I'll make 15 even, because most likely I'm gonna trim through one or two, and then I like to match up the shapes as best as possible. And plates also warp and they're annoying.
You're also going really fast here.
Yeah, I'm going fast. The reason you don't want to go super slow, like this would be not beneficial, is because any little like hiccup in my hand will be very readable on this surface. Maybe like this speed is nice. I would say this is as slow as you want to go. So yeah, and then it's a matter of fine tuning your foot and how you want it to look. The foot on this piece is really nice and rounded. And these are kind of like my final suggestions. If you left this flat with like 90-degree angles, and this is true for lips too, they'll chip. They're super easy to chip. So having a slight bevel on either side, beveled edges, makes the foot stronger, makes a lip stronger, so on and so forth. I also think having an undercut, this has an undercut too, helps in the glazing process so that you can palm the foot and like dunk it into a glaze bath. And then if you want to get rid of these ridges, the trimming marks, you can smooth it out either with a sponge. Once it's like the very last step, you smooth out with a sponge, or I like to use the metal ribs with a little bit of water, and that'll give you a kind of like a burnished surface. So, and then the moment of truth, when it's time to take it off the wheel and see if you did a good job. So to know whether or not I feel like I've trimmed enough of it off, I'm thinking of that inside shape that I tried to memorize. And then I'm also tapping it to hear the sound. Oop, that actually moved. See how it's moving? So I don't want to go any further. When your clay actually is wet enough, it's tapping, and I actually do that. I kind of push and see if it's starting to give. And if it's starting to give, then it's like, all right, no more. So, let's see. I'll trim this a little more just to make my foot look better, but yeah, it's pretty good. It feels nice and balanced. So, that's trimming. Generally just visualizing the shape, the foot that you want. It's very architectural and sculptural, so it doesn't have to be like boring foot. You can get funky with it. You can carve. You don't even need to use the wheel. You can trim it by hand. There's a lot you can do. So, but this is like that traditional pottery trimming, satisfying needs stuff. So, you're more than welcome to use any of my like diamond core tools. And then signing your piece, I like to use a rubber tip or a dull pencil. Avoid using your needle tool. You get the little crumbs, boogers that are annoying to clean up. So, yeah.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
So on that